Something about organisations, collectives, seems to make them prone to capture by the left. Maybe that's because Conservatives tend to be more individualistic, don't hunt in packs, whatever it is. How often do you see this? The ABC captured, unions obviously, writers' festivals. And then they get turned, of course, into political weapons. Even the Australian Medical Association, our doctors' union. This phenomenon is not actually new with the AMA. You look at recent presidents, Karen Phelps, who was briefly an independent MP, crusading on refugees and global warming, and Brian Adler, another global warming activist who stood for Labor at the last election. Now the AMA president is Tony Bartoni, who this week said the AMA was declaring a global warming health emergency on the basis of claims that, as I showed you last night, were false or highly misleading.
The rising incidences of mortality from heat stress, the rising weather events, the food insecurity.
As I said last night, I went through them. Look, they're wrong. Heat isn't the biggest climate killer. Cold is 20 times more deadly. Deaths from extreme weather have actually fallen over the century, not risen. And as for food security, we're actually growing more food, not less. Joining me is Dr David Adler, a former AMA Deputy Medical Secretary and now head of the Australian Jewish Association. David, it's good to see you again. Now, look, you were senior in the AMA. And I have to ask,
Correct.
Has it been hijacked?
Andrew, this is actually a sad subject for me because for some years I served as both an elected representative and on the secretariat, holding various positions. I was the chairman of the Hospitals Committee in New South Wales, and as you said, I was Deputy Medical Secretary. We want our institutions to be fine institutions, and the AMA previously was a very fine professional institution. It has no doubt deteriorated significantly in a range of parameters, and politically it has, as you've said, shifted more and more to the left, and instead of focusing on the sort of things that a quality professional association focuses on, it has become a leftist activist rump almost. Very disappointing and very sad for someone who's put a lot of time and effort in the past into that institution.
I just wonder how these things happen, though, David, because take this global warming health emergency that the AMA has now declared. Would members have been consulted about that?
I very much doubt it. The way members are reacting is very interesting. They're voting with their feet. When I was involved with the AMA, it had a significant majority of doctors as members. Now, unlike the Law Society or the Bar Association, doctors do not have to be members of the AMA. That's a misnomer that's held in the general public quite widely. It's not necessary for your registration. It is a voluntary professional association. We had 65–70% of doctors as members. Now, I consulted last night someone who was a former chairman of the Federal Council of the AMA, and he tells me that the membership has slipped and slipped and slipped, and he estimates that currently in the order of 23% of doctors in Australia are members of the AMA. I mean, that is an enormous change.
That sure is. Do you think it's got anything to do with the more political the AMA has become, the less attractive it is for a number of its members who can't all be Greens or Labor voters?
Correct. Yeah, and doctors, at least my experience, is that they are by nature fairly conservative. Most of them, after all, are professionals. They're running small businesses by definition. Yes, there's a component that are salaried in hospitals, etc., but most of our doctors are in private practice. So they relate to those sort of values that you would expect professionals and small business people to relate to. You mentioned a couple of the recent AMA presidents. The sort of people that I remember having made a big contribution. People like Bruce Shepherd, or perhaps more well-known now, Brendan Nelson, is a former AMA president. And of course, he's distinguished himself greatly in his leadership at the Australian War Memorial. These are the sort of people that we wanted leading the professional association for doctors in this country.
Now, in case people are jumping up and down and saying, "Hey, listen, but Brendan Nelson was a Liberal politician, doesn't that challenge what you're saying?" I have to point out that Brendan Nelson started life with Labor, so he was a man of all seasons in that regard for a while, at any rate. Finally, I don't know, David, how closely you follow the global warming debate, but I have to ask, how does something so unscientific as what the AMA put out this week get put out by a doctors' union that's meant to be scrupulous about science?
Well, they're supposed to be scrupulous about science, but they're actually not a scientific body. I mean, doctors, like any other group in the community, vary greatly in terms of quality. What doctors are trained to do in medical school, as you would expect, is to provide quality care to patients. If you're ill, you want to go to somebody who's well trained, who can diagnose and treat you. They're not trained to assess broader political issues. So whether it's the Medivac legislation that you referred to, which weakens border security, we've had in New South Wales recently, as I'm sure everyone knows, a debate about late-term abortion. I was shocked to learn that the AMA in New South Wales has come out in support of late-term abortion. The climate change, as you refer to, I mean, these are leftist political activism. It's not the sort of thing that you learn at university in a medical course, I assure you.
You put your finger on a real phenomenon that a lot of other people have spoken to. You can be very expert in your area. It does not immediately mean that you're an expert in someone else's. And I think we're seeing a little bit of overreach here. David Adler, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Andrew.